Hi everyone, welcome to Talks at Google. Today it is my pleasure to welcome Jim Butcher for the Aeronaut's Windlass. Jim, welcome to Google.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for us being your first tech stop ever, not bookstore.
Ever.
Can you tell us about the book?
It's a steampunk novel. I started, when I first started pitching it, I tried to tell people that it's sort of X-Men meets Hornblower. But then I decided that wasn't steampunky enough. So from then on, I said it's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen meets Hornblower. But it's set in a world where the surface of the world is very dangerous, and so everybody lives in these enormous black obsidian spires that were built many, many, many moons ago. And all contact between the spires is done by airships. So all diplomacy, all trade, all everything is done by airship from spire to spire. Two of the more powerful spires in this world are in the opening stages of going to war with one another, and the monarch of the local spire has decided that he needs an action team to help better position his spire before the war gets started. So he goes out and recruits a pirate and a princess and a wizard, and there's a checklist. All right, I don't make up these rules, and a warrior and a girl who can talk to cats. Plus her cat, although it's not really as much her cat as she's his human. But so he gets this group together and sends them off on a mission to find a traitor within their own midst before something totally horrible happens, and then totally horrible things happen and adventure ensues. So that's kind of the first book, is we get to meet these people and see the kind of world that they're in, and then throw them into hideous danger against horrible monsters and evil opponents and not so evil opponents, and I think it's I had a whole lot of fun writing it. It's one of the things I've had a better time writing than many other projects I've done. Also, it's the longest book I've ever written. It checked in at over 200,000 words, so it's a falling hazard to children and small animals. So if you get the book, be careful with that.
I'd love to know what some of your inspirations were for it. I mean, it felt like kind of this hybrid between a world where there's magic, much like Dresden Files, but it's also this sort of nobility-based oligarchy kind of situation.
Well, not Star Wars, definitely not Star Wars.
Never.
Really, the heaviest influence probably came from the nautical hero novel. So you start with Hornblower, and then the books of that was a Forrester, I believe, and then the Jack Aubrey books that were the ones that were published in the 90s, the ones they made Master and Commander off of. Master and Commander was my background movie for while I was writing this series, so that was probably, and then those and David Weber's Honor Harrington books. Which also came from that same source, was also partially inspiration. And because my brain is not working right now, 20,000 Leagues from Under the Sea. That's my strongest steampunk, direct steampunk influence. Although that was just science fiction at the time, they didn't know to call it steampunk. So, I actually don't think it's a steampunk novel. I think it's I wanted to call it a steam opera. Because it's like space opera, but it's not. It's airships, and so I wanted to call it a steam opera. And my editor was like, "Jim, you can't just go inventing genres like that." And I was like, "Oh." But maybe if we get enough, if the series gets enough oomph, maybe there'll be a new genre. That'd be cool.
You can be a pioneer.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned. I mean, obviously nautical. They're in the air, but it felt very naval. Did you do a lot of research into that? It felt. Having read the Master and Commander Horatio Hornblower books, I felt like I was reading that, but at the same time, they're soaring through the air.
Yeah, I started doing. I was doing a whole lot of research, and then I realized that I was researching the wrong place, because I really needed to be researching ballooning and blimp stuff, and the blimp stuff from World War I especially, to find out more things about what was going on. I did get into nautical research, and let me tell you, and this is what I learned about nautical research. There is a name for everything, and it makes no sense at all. But you had to have a specific name for every little rope and every little stay where the rope was tied off and anything the rope was attached to. And they all had to have these very specific names so that in the middle of a crisis situation, somebody who was an officer could look at you and say, "You something the mizzen bowsprit, and you would know exactly what had to be done in order to, because otherwise you might all die. It was very technical, very focused language for when you were working on one of these ships. And if you didn't know it, you were kind of a threat to everybody else because you needed to be able to do everything. So, yes, there was so much research, and I still need to do more because it's going to get more involved as the series goes on, because that's what series do, from everything I've seen. I'm actually going to have to get down to San Diego and go hang out on the tall ships that are in the harbor there and ask a lot of questions and write a lot of things down.
Sounds like a terrible, terrible research experience.
I know, it'd be so awful.
Is it easier in a case like that to then just use kind of our real world terminology for that, or would you rather kind of create your own in a scenario like that?
I like to use real world terminology whenever I can, because when I'm writing, I'm doing the absolute best I can to make the language as transparent as possible, so that when you're reading, you forget that you're reading words and you're just watching the movie that's playing on the screen in your head. I try and do everything I can to keep my language from intruding on the story that's happening, which is why I don't use. I think I write at about an 8th grade reading level on average, because I don't want the words to get in the way of the experience for the reader. Books, I think, are the first virtual reality, and I invest very heavily in that idea in the way I've put together my writing style. So
what's something about this book that you enjoy, like that you learned from your previous series that you enjoyed being able to explore in this series? Like, what limitations kind of were removed for you from getting to start afresh?
The main thing that I did was when I was writing, the Alara books were the other books that I wrote before this, and they were similarly third-person, multiple viewpoint characters. And the pace for those books was a little bit slow, because they kind of happened over a broader span of time for the most part, than when compared to the Dresden Files, which are always, when I write the Dresden Files, basically I'm writing about Harry Dresden's worst weekend of the year. And so all the story that happens has to happen in this very little compressed space. And so I decided I wanted to try and do that with this book as well, only from multiple character viewpoints. So the events of the story happen in that same compressed space, but we see it from several different points of view. And the challenge to doing that, when you've got that, then the question becomes, where do I put the camera for this particular scene? You know, which character is best going to show, you know, the events of this action? Which character is best going to be involved in them? Which is the one that's going to help the reader best understand what's going on? Because I'll know what's going on in this airship battle, but if I just write, you know, if I just write paragraphs and paragraphs of airship battle, the reader isn't necessarily going to know what's going on. So it's like, okay, so for this fight, we're going to go over to this character who's never been on an airship before, and yet who is kind of bossy enough to demand answers to questions from people who have better things to be doing, so that the reader kind of will get what's going on, because the characters who know will be explaining it to this dummy. It's a concept called the joy of idiocy in writing craft, and you always keep an idiot around to ask questions as a surrogate for the reader, so that hopefully the idiot asks the questions that the reader wants answered, and then the reader gets to know the answers without ever having to admit that they didn't know. You know, so that's one of the fun things you get to play with when you've got multiple viewpoints.
Thank you for providing us all with very interesting idiots. No, but I, as you said, you know, it was a great, awesome experience to have these multiple viewpoints. And one thing I loved about this particular book is that you have a bunch of wonderful women in it. It's almost an even, I think at least an even matchup of kind of female protagonist to male. And there's this whole range on both genders. You know, where were some of the inspirations for those characters?
Some of them were, I was writing, and there they were. That Bridget certainly kind of emerged that way. Gwen was a character who actually emerged from a role-playing game that I was running in this story world. That's how I do my research for my story worlds, is I'll get something built and then I'll run a role-playing game in it, in the world. And that's always wonderful, because when I do that, the players can never do anything right. You can write any script you want for the players. They aren't going to follow that script. They're going to break it somehow, and then you find yourself frantically building the world, you know, 6 inches in front of their feet as they are stomping off in the completely wrong direction. It's a good exercise in creativity, and it really helps me sort of flesh out things as I'm going along. So she came from one of the players, and I mean there were just various various portions of the world. I knew what I wanted my villain to be like. I knew I wanted my villain to be evil Mary Poppins, and she kind of is. She's this very proper person, and she can't kill you as long as you're being polite. But she just waits for you to make a slip in etiquette, and then she can tear your eyes out. So a little bit of pressure.
It's every Catholic school child's worst nightmare.
Yeah, exactly.
There's one very unique character who I very much enjoyed, and that is Raoul. You wrote a cat who talks.
I know.
You wrote people who talk to cats. What up with that?
Well, I wanted cats, and I wanted talking cats, and I was thinking, I wanted to establish this race of intelligent cats that live alongside humanity, not kind of like with humanity in a pet situation, because that wouldn't really happen very well.
It's sort of a pet situation in the other way.
Yes, it works the other way around. But these cats live alongside the societies in these spires, and they kind of live in the vents and air tunnels, and kill things that come in there from the surface that are cat-sized, and. Yet the humans don't really like them, but they can't really get rid of them because they perform a really useful service, and they can't really just ignore them because the cats have opposable thumbs and matches. So in a lot of ways for the cats, it's like, oh, I notice your warehouse is rodent-free. Perhaps you would like it to continue to be rodent-free. Perhaps there will be cream waiting for us every Thursday at 3. So really, the cats are kind of this little fuzzy mafia that sort of exists in an underworld alongside humanity. But the cats also can go everywhere and hear everything and learn everything because they're quiet and they're smart and they have excellent senses. And the Lord of the Spirearch figures out that, oh wait, these cats are really, really useful. We probably shouldn't just treat them like vermin. Yeah, I need every advantage I can get, and so he recruits somebody who's friends with a cat. Her father runs a vattery, which is where they grow meat in vats inside these spires. And so basically, she works in a butcher shop, and they have a deal with the local cats. And she made friends with one when she was very small, and the cat named her Little Mouse. She's about 6'2", but the cat named her Little Mouse, and then she grew up much larger than she had been when he first met her, which offended him greatly. But he hangs out with her, so Raoul and Bridget are a team, and Raoul taught Bridget how to speak cat, and so Bridget can talk to the cats, and the cats understand English except when they don't. And but they're the most obnoxious little characters. Oh my gosh! I mean. And honestly, I would like to think these books will succeed because it's got a cool story world, or it's got really identifiable characters, or it's got great action, or because there's good plots in them, but they're going to succeed because there's talking cats. And I've made peace with that,
Opposable thumbs mean signable checks.
Yes, exactly. The hard part is not letting them steal the show from all the plain old boring humans.
I was so surprised to learn that you were not necessarily a cat person beforehand.
No.
But you very accurately, at least I would imagine. I'm not a cat person, but that's what I imagine cats would sound like just in terms of pompousness.
I wasn't a cat person myself, but I knew cat people, and how they think and talk about their cats, and I've been introduced to cats for a long time from the point of view of those who love them very much, and now I have cats. They're not mine. I got them for my fiance. And she named them after the cats in the books, and they're Maine Coons and they're kittens and they're enormous and they're adorable. And I'm like, go away, cat. I don't need to like you. Get out of here. We have a business relationship. Go. And it's like, why are you sitting on my lap and purring? Oh, it's so adorable. Damn.
So I'd love to know what you've sort of touched upon this, but what you said you very much enjoyed writing these books. What's something that was different about writing them from writing your other ones?
Well, I mean,
aside from talking cats.
Right, aside from talking cats. There was a lot of. I was really working on trying to make sure that I had down a dialogue that didn't quite sound like regular, everyday, the way people use their speech patterns. I was trying for something a little bit more formal, a little bit more archaic sounding. I wanted it to feel a little bit more like Downton Abbey without it actually being that way. So there's a lot of they use the word quite a lot and so on. I mean, there's a lot of these conversations that are very painfully precise, and nobody wants to talk about their actual feelings and so on. So
Bridge to a T.
yes, that was the idea. There's a scene where everybody's having tea and maybe getting ready to murder each other, and you don't really know until the tea's done, you know. So that was fun to write. So now I'm learning about tea. Now I've been approached by all these people who know about tea. So now I'm learning about tea things. Apparently you can have tea duels now. I don't know how that works, but they make holsters with teacups and saucers on them, and yeah, I mean, apparently it's a whole thing.
Is it like 1, 2, 3 brew?
I don't know.
I think you should find out.
I don't know. Are you kidding? I'm not even sure I would survive this situation.
I'm curious if there were any lessons you learned writing your previous books that you were excited to apply to these?
I don't know, maybe.
Don't commit to a 20-book series?
Yeah. Well, that might be one.
Three is safe.
I did, yeah, I mean, I've got 3 books contracted in this series, and I've set it up so where I can end it after 3 or 6 or 9. I hope I get to do the whole thing, because it's got a pretty big story, and I want to tell the whole thing, and I think it'd be a lot of fun. But I don't know if it will actually get there. We'll see how the market does and how receptive the audience is and so on. I mean, I'm pretty sure that people, when they read it, they're going to start liking it, and they'll go along for the ride, and they'll want to get all the way to the end. But, you know, I can't predict that. So you got to make plans. So I made plans on this one rather than just saying, this is going to be 20 books long. That was a terrible plan. And there was no way I was ever going to be able to sell that series at 20 books, and I knew, and I did, but I was too dumb to know that, so I went and did it. So.
You do something interesting, and I'm not sure if you still do it, but you use beta readers.
I do.
Did you use those on?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, in picking the project, I wrote the first 25% of 4 different novels and presented them to the beta readers one at a time and to get their responses and say, here, what do you think? Here, what do you think? Here, what do you think? So there was a science fiction novel, which was basically Men in Black on the moon a couple hundred years in the future. There was my Black Company-esque fantasy novel. There was a third fantasy novel. I forget the details of that one. It was kind of awful. And then there was the steampunk, and the steampunk was the one that everybody was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I had a stronger reaction to that than I've had to anything, including the Dresden Files from the beta readers. So I'm like, "Okay, it looks like I'm writing steampunk now. I seem to have a handle on this one. Let's go."
I think the beta process is something we at Google are pretty familiar with.
Yes.
Where do you get your beta readers from? Is it sort of, are there tiers of it? Is it like you have a trusted circle of like, here's where you want your feedback from, or is it just sort of you want a general populace of people who enjoy your work to?
I've got about 15 people on the beta reading list, and I've got a waiting list of beta readers. And when but there are times when I meet somebody where somebody comes up with a very incisive question or makes an observation that is really sharp, or picks up on a plot point that I've dropped hints for but haven't really unveiled and brought out into the open, and I'll be like, would you like to be a beta reader? And you would be surprised. Only about 1 person in 3 who I asked to be a beta reader actually does it and replies to things on time and so on. Most of them just kind of wander off. I don't know why that is, but it's a creative crowd, so. We
know nothing about beta feedback. I'd love to know, in general, who are some of your influences?
In general?
In general.
Oh, gosh.
Personal life, literary.
Not Star Wars.
Not Star Wars.
Well, I mean, the big ones are probably my dad and my mom and my sisters. My family have been the biggest influence. In my first book, I write a thank you to my writing teacher who taught me everything I need to know about writing, and then to my dad who taught me everything I need to know about living. And my sisters, when I was, they took me to see Star Wars when it first came out. It's the first movie I actually remember going to see. When Empire Strikes Back came out, they came to the school and lied to my principal and told him that I had a dentist appointment and checked me out of school, and then blindfolded me and took me down to the very first premiere of Empire in Kansas City at the big old Grand Opry Theater with the big swooping curtains in front of the movie, in front of the screen, because they were cool like that. And the same for Return of the Jedi and so on. And
I think you owe them forever.
Yeah, it's true. I've tried to pay them back. When Return of the King came out, I went and checked my son out of school. Same thing. I took him to see the first showing of Return of the King because there are some traditions that are worth preserving. And we're all planning on, all the kids are planning, me and my nieces and nephews and my son, we're all planning on going and getting my other sister's 2 little girls. She's got twin 8-year-old girls, and we're going to go check them out of school to go see Star Wars in December. So,
who will you be dressing as for that?
Oh, I've got a Jedi robe at home. I've got a Jedi robe at home. Okay. I'll wear that.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I just got finished reading Tribal Bigfoot by David Paulides for my nonfiction. Which is a story, or which is a book that compiles Bigfoot sightings and encounters in connection with Native Americans. And then I'm reading the first Powder Mage book by Brian McClellan right now.
Does that nonfiction book have anything to do with Dresden? I know I said I wouldn't ask, but
no, I've been fascinated with Bigfoot since I was a small child and had recurring nightmares about him. So I've dealt with them by learning everything I could about Bigfoot. So.
Okay, just wondering about the kind of Native American spirituality thing. But
oh yeah.
What books might we be surprised to find on your shelves?
Oh, gosh, I don't know if I'd be surprised. Well, I guess I wouldn't be surprised at anything because they're mine. There would be the old spread of romance novels that I read when I was first getting started learning writing theory, and I went out and bought a bunch of different books by best-selling authors from a number of different genres and read them and tried to identify, what are the common factors in these books? What are the things that they all have in common? So there's a bunch of like romance novels and standard mystery novels. One of my favorite writers is Robert B. Parker, so there's a ton of Spencer novels all over my shelves. A lot of Piers Anthony, bad pun novels. I've loved those. So I don't know if you'd be surprised by anything that was there. If it's science fiction and there's a good story or a cool world or somebody who writes really fast plots or really good characters, then I've got them up there, and I'm studying them and trying to steal everything I can from them. I mean, trying to better myself as a writer.
Do you find yourself able to enjoy science fiction books, or does it hit too close to home, or is it always like a research project for you, or are you able, if it's well written and engaging, are you just a regular reader?
It's very hard to get into that space where I can disengage my professional brain from it. And go, oh, okay, and where I'm not breaking down, oh, I see why this is so effective, it's because he did this here and that here. When I do get a book that I can just turn it off and I'm reading along and going, oh, that was awesome. And then I'll be like, wait a minute, you're too professional to do that. Shut up, you can do that. You can talk to me later, professional guy. Those are much rarer to find a good book that I can really just enjoy purely for the sake of enjoying. So there's only a few writers who do that for me on a regular basis.
Can you name them, or is this like a don't let them know, don't inflate their egos?
Oh no, Sanderson doesn't have an ego, I don't think. He's like this genuinely nice guy. It's disgusting. There's a new Sanderson book came out here recently, and I got on the plane in Chicago and flew out to San Francisco and landed, and he'd written another book in that time. I mean, there it was. I swear he's a clone or a robot or has an army of clone robots. I don't know, something like that. It's impressive.
What type of reader were you as a child? What was one of your favorites?
Voracious and indiscriminate would be the words I would say would apply to that. I started off with the Chronicles of Narnia, and then the Prydain Chronicles, which are books that are excellent and are still excellent, and I still go back and reread them every couple of years. The books by Lloyd Alexander. And then after that, it was everything I could find. I picked up my sister. One sister got me the Lord of the Rings one year when I was sick in first grade, and I read through the Lord of the Rings. And the other sister got me the Han Solo trilogy by Brian Daley that they had put out, and I read through that one. Just devoured that. And I read every science fiction and fantasy book they had in the school library, and then I went over to the nonfiction section to mythology and started reading all the mythology stuff and everything they had about UFOs and Bigfoot. Which in the 70s was considerable, and from there, I mean, it was just everything. I would read adventure novels, mystery novels, everything I could get my hands on. I was one of those kids who, where they would have like the posters, and they'd put like a little star next to your name for every time you read a book, and my name had like stars, and then an attached piece of paper with more stars, and then another piece of paper attached to that with more stars, kind of longer than the poster board was. In 4th grade, I had a teacher who made it a policy to take books away from me whenever I was reading them at inappropriate times in class. And then she had to bring in and assemble a bookshelf in her classroom because she kept taking books and I kept going to get more. And at the end of the year, we had to have like a hand truck and a bunch of crates to bring home all the books that she had confiscated from me that year. And the teachers the next year were going to do the same thing, and they got to look at that on the way out, and they just said, you know what? He seems to be getting the lesson. Maybe we should just let him read. They just sort of sat me at the back, and so I could read quietly and not disturb the other children, so.
You were educating in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm curious, if you could go back in time 15 years and tell yourself anything, what would it be?
Oh, God. What kind of madman are you? The temporal police will get us.
Sports Almanac.
Yeah. I would not, one, I don't want to disturb the time-space continuum because that seems like an unwise thing to do. 2, it seems like an unwise thing to do because I don't really have any complaints about the way the past 15 years have gone, at least not as far as the writing thing has proceeded. I mean, sure, there are parts that could have gone better, but overall, kind of looking where I am now, I'd be crazy to go back and try and rock the boat. That seems quite a terrible idea to me. I'm kind of at a point in my career now where I can write what I want and have a reasonably good chance of having somebody publish it for me. And I've got to turn down work. I've got a bunch of problems with my career, but they are like really awesome problems, like my hand hurts from signing too many books. Okay, now at the same time, that is great. It's also terrible because my freaking arm hurts. But at the same time, if you're going to have a problem, that is a pretty cool problem. I kind of dig that. So yeah, I don't want to change anything. I'm pleased with how it's gone.
That's wonderful. Are there any genres you'd like to dive into that you haven't explored yet?
I still want to do science fiction, and the answer is yes, all of them. I still want to do science fiction. I haven't gotten to. I'm going to write an epic fantasy epic one day, and it will be epic. Big old honking doorstop elves, dwarves, and hobbits. They won't look like elves, dwarves, and hobbits because I'll have painted them and filed off the serial numbers. But it'll be elves, dwarves, and hobbits. But yeah, I mean, I want to do my big old doorstop fantasy one of these days. The Dresden Files just kind of started off as this side thing that I was doing as a project to prove to my writing teacher how wrong she was. But I wanted to write swords and horses fantasies, what I wanted.
Have you spoken to that writing teacher since?
Yes, actually, many times, and she wrote me a couple of years ago and said, "Hey, do you think I can pay you to write a forward to my my storycraft book that I'm getting set to turn out to publish?" And I was like, "No, you can't pay me to write that forward." And so I wrote up a forward for her because she wound up teaching me a whole lot, and I knew a whole lot less than I thought I did. So, but she was a wonderful teacher.
So you have some pretty engaged fans. What's one of your most interesting fan interactions?
Interesting fan interactions.
Unique fan interactions?
I got engaged to one. I met her.
That was a unique one.
Yeah, it was kind of unique. I met her in an autograph line a couple of years ago, and worked up the courage to speak to her on Facebook about 6 months later because she's pretty and a girl, and I can't just go talk to her. Yeah, it doesn't change. The nerd does not. You can take the nerd out of the school, but you can't. It doesn't come out. It doesn't wash clear. Let's see. I've had fans who showed up at my house to get an autograph, who road tripped to my house from Norman, Oklahoma, in Independence, Missouri, and just knocked at my door and asked for an autograph. That was a little disturbing, actually.
Yeah, we're not encouraging that, just so everyone knows.
And the ironic thing was, I wasn't at home. I was out of town in Norman, Oklahoma, attending a friend's wedding. So they'd driven all that way for nothing. I felt kind of bad for them. But there's been all kinds of things. If you're worried about talking to me or seeming weird or something like that, the bar you have to clear to not be all that weird is very low. So don't worry about it. It's cool.
This is unrelated to anything, but I said I'd ask you, what's your favorite cosplay?
My favorite cosplay, the favorite one I've done lately is me and Kitty have done Gomez and Morticia. And that's been a whole lot of fun because you're cosplaying Gomez, and the way you sell that is with the crazy eyes. You have to have the smile and the crazy eyes, like maybe I'm about to come knife you, and then it works out. And then we also did at DragonCon, a bunch of us did. This was well before the steampunk book came out, and a bunch of my friends wanted to cosplay the steampunk characters. I'm like, you bunch of hipsters. wanted. Yeah, I'm dressed as a character from a book. You probably haven't read it. Of course not, because it hasn't been published yet. Oh, you guys, you're horrible with your privilege.
We'll take audience questions in a moment if anyone wants to line up. He said you can ask questions, guys. Okay, what's one technology or power from this book, from Aeronauts Windlass, that you wish you had?
They use, instead of guns, they use gauntlets. They have guns, but guns are really risky to use, so they use gauntlets, which are basically Tony Stark Iron Man gauntlets, only way steampunkier. So you wear, there's a crystal up against your palm, and it's connected by wires to a cage of copper wire that goes around your forearm, and you got to wear leather underneath it because the wire heats up after you use it for a while, and you get to blast away, like this at people, and that would be awesome. Not like I want to murder people. I just want to be able to have that option available to me. That would be totally cool.
There's other uses, demolition, And then my last question for you is, if you could live in one of the worlds in any of your series that you've written so far, which would it be?
If I could live in one of the worlds, I wouldn't want to live any of those places. Oh my gosh.
You had to live in one of the worlds.
Okay, if I had to live in one, Dresden Files, Chicago, I guess. I would go there. I would go there and I would buy some place that, just some apartment to live in that Harry never goes near, hardly ever sees, and I would stay real low, the entire time.
So, hi.
Hi.
You've talked about the Dresden Files and getting started with that, and I think I've read what you just said about how it started as a prove your point type piece. I've read through them all and recommended them to friends and say, okay, but the first two, they seem a little, like you're not know where you're going. And Summer Night happens like about book 3 or 4, and it seems to like gel, and all of a sudden there's this major arc. Is that a correct assessment, or is that incorrect? At what point did you have that big arc that you're building now? And I hope I'm not offending you by that.
No, not at all. Okay. When I first wrote the first Dresden Files book, I turned in the first couple of chapters, and my teacher looked at it and looked up to me and said, "You did it." And I said, "What?" She says, "You did it. This is a professional quality. I don't know if this will be the first thing you sell, but you'll be able to sell this." And I was just like, oh. And she said, "You're going to need to plan out the rest of it." Okay? And she was talking about the rest of the novel. But I came running back into conference the next week and was like, "Okay, here, I've got this planned out. I got this whole thing planned out. It's going to be about 20 books, maybe 21. I'm not sure if I get them all in that time. And then there's going to be a big old 3-book trilogy at the end that kind of capstone the entire thing. What do you think?" And she just kind of looks at me the way the Roadrunner looks at Wile E. Coyote as he's charging off a cliff. And I can still see the expression on her face in my memory, because I can tell that she had finally gotten me on board with her, with what she was trying to teach me, so she didn't want to quash my enthusiasm. But at the same time, there was no way I was going to sell a 20-book series to any publisher anywhere. So she had to give me an answer that would not dissuade me and not crush my enthusiasm. And so she just kind of looks at me and says, "Well, I think if you sell a 20-book series, yeah, you should be doing fine," like that. So I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I wasn't very good at putting the story together and dropping things out ahead of time. As I've continued writing, I've learned to trust the readers a whole lot more. Readers are smart. And so when I first started setting up the story, I was only dropping 1 or 2 little things in that were going to come into the long haul, and otherwise trying to focus on Harry's immediate surroundings, basically. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, readers are much better at putting this together than I ever thought they were. So I started, incorporating more and more, and being able to bring in more subplots, more characters, more plans for the future, more payoffs from the past, because I was writing for, I'm writing for people like me. I'm writing for nerds. Nerds are smart. They can work this stuff out. So I just sat down and started doing that. And as I learned to trust the audience more, I think the books got better, because the audience was able to grab onto them and enjoy them more.
Hi.
Hi.
I love the Dresden Files, the arc, the little bits that you drop here and there, and the payoffs later on, and those sorts of things. And I normally wouldn't ask this, but it's driving me nuts. And since every time a new one comes out, I find myself rereading the whole Dresden Files up to it, and take notes in the side and all that. in Proven Guilty, when Harry is driving back, he gets hit by a drive-by, and there's some hints, and that never gets resolved in that book, and I haven't seen a resolution soon. Is that at some point going to be resolved?
Weird, right?
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, the audience can pick these things up. But yeah, there's a lot of little stuff like that that's been seeded through actually, and that will get answered eventually and hasn't been yet, and that's cool. It'll be more fun later.
What role-playing system are you using? How do your role-playing games differ from how your plots ensue in a novel? And when can I buy the Evil Hat version of Windlass?
Okay, I don't know if we don't have a deal with Evil Hat yet. I think they're trying to do the Dresden collectible card game first. So there's that question. I'm answering in reverse order here. How does my role playing differ from my book writing? Not significantly. I tend to cliffhang every play session at the end of just like I do chapters, to where the players are going, "We're going to stop there." I like doing that. I like to torture the players and to bring up the things that are just the absolute wrong, worst thing for them at the time. They like it, you know. As far as game systems, I ran the Cinder Spires stuff with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Right now, I'm playing Pathfinder because I realized that my son had reached 21 years of age and had never played Dungeons and Dragons, like every other role-playing game under the sun, but never D&D. Except I went out and got D&D, and D&D was 4th edition, so it wasn't D&D anymore. So I went and got Pathfinder, and then I went and got the Keep on the Borderlands, because that's where you start playing D&D. Only I set it during a zombie apocalypse. So in order to, the Keep on the Borderlands was like the only human stronghold that was left, but in order to be allowed inside, they had to agree to be on the Expeditionary Force. And the Expeditionary Force got sent off to the Caves of Chaos to see if they could make an alliance with the Greenskins against the zombies. So the Caves of Chaos as a diplomatic mission. That was awesome. We had so much fun playing that. But yeah, you know, whatever system comes by, I want to run something in 5th edition now that it's come out. That looks pretty cool. Very welcome.
When you play D&D, do you DM or do you play as one of the players?
I mostly DM. When I play, I get so bored with my character that I will either get heroic or stupid about every 2 weeks so I can get a new character, you know. and finally, at some point, you know, my GMs have just gone, "Oh, Jim, just switch to a different character and we'll just pretend that this guy hopped out of a backpack, okay?" That's
magic.
That's how it's going to be. Because you're really stretching far to get killed, you know, at dinner, you know, in the friendly convent. So, but anyway, so.
Thank you for so much for coming and speaking.
Sure.
So one of Harry's cachets, I guess, in the beginning of the series is because of his magic, he can't be anywhere near tech. He has to take cold showers. He basically lives this aesthete life in a basement. As a writer, how does your relationship with technology change the way that you write?
How does my relationship with technology change the way that I write? The biggest influence that it's had on it is, okay, when I first started writing the Dresden Files, I was a college student with no money. And so research for Chicago was basically me buying a couple of Chicago guidebooks and learning what I could about Chicago from that. I didn't know anybody who lived there. I didn't have enough money to go there, so my research had to come from whatever I could find in a book. Fast forward a couple years, and the internet is up and running on a regular basis that everybody can get to, and people are able to take digital pictures on their phone and then, or on their digital pictures on their digital camera and then upload them to the internet. That was new. And so I would be able to say to people who had read a couple of my books, "Hey, I need to know what the east wall of Graceland Cemetery looks like." And I would send that out to this list of folks who lived in Chicago, and I would get a reply. "I drive by there on the way to work every morning. I'll take a picture of it for you." And you know, and lo and behold, by noon, I'd know what it looked like, and I could write it. That was amazing. And then later came you guys, came Google and Google Maps and Google Street View. So then I would go Google Street View everything, and I would use it and set up my scenes by standing on the street and looking around and you know, being able to visually see everything in the relationship of where all the objects were to one another, to the point that a couple of years ago I had a Chicago SWAT captain come up to me and say, You know that scene that you set up where you had the shooter on the roof and he took out a number of headlights or street lights, so there was only one approach, and so that he could control this hostage situation. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I really need to know who you talk to get that information because we like to keep track of people who know that kind of thing. And I had to look at him and say, I just used what I knew from Call of Duty and Google Street View. And he just looks at me, and it just kind of gets. I swear he aged 5 years just right in that during the time of that sentence. Then he shakes his head and is like, "Oh man, I hate the internet." But then there's like all the marketing aspects and so on too, because I can communicate with my fans and readers all the time. I can get feedback directly from them. I do all my beta reading is on an email list that I sign people up for. I couldn't do it without the internet, and when I don't have the internet, I get twitchy. So I mean that happens occasionally, and I scream. I mean, I run around. I don't know what to do anymore. I need my internet. So
Thanks.
very welcome. Hello.
Hey, generally when authors have their books turned into TV or movies, they're given complete control over how to cash the check, and that's it. So, what was your? I thought the Dresden TV was done fairly well given restrictions. What did you think about it? How would you have changed? What you might do differently if you could? Or
I've always been a glass half full kind of guy.
Yeah.
So I like to think that the TV series died before it could mess anything up too horribly, and so that's good.
Right.
And it also introduced a lot of people to the books, which is also very good. The kind of now I think if I wanted to do it again, and it's a possibility that it will happen again because the rights are out with a major company. Cool. If it does happen again, this time I've sort of attached myself to the property in terms of I want to be a consultant, not so that I can make it exactly like my books because I know it has to change a bit when it goes to a different medium, but so that we can keep the kind of the same spirit of awesome of the flavor of awesome that I like in the Dresden Files and to continue using it elsewhere.
Cool.
All in all, I had no contractual authority on my stuff at all when it went there. But I had friends on the internet and readers on the internet who worked out who was going to be in charge of the project by putting together rumors, and then talked to me and said, "We think it's going to be this guy, Robert Wolfe." And I'm like, "Robert Wolfe? I love the first couple seasons of Andromeda," and so I contacted Robert Wolfe and said, "I suspect because of this fact and this fact that you're the one who's going to be in charge of this." He's like, "That's amazing! You're like a real life detective," and I'm like, "Yes, I am."
With magical powers.
But it turns out that he's a D&D nerd, and we're both Roman Empire buffs.
Oh, good.
And so we sat down and talked about it, and we got along really well. And so I actually had a lot more influence than you would think over the show because I got on so well with Robert. And I was very fortunate in that, but that was purely an interpersonal thing. Cool. But he did a great job. I think you're right. I think they did a great job with the limitations they were handed.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry to come back again, but this was about Codex Alera.
Okay.
And those were a great escape hatch for me one year when it was a bad year. So
Good.
Thank you. In those books, there were two things that I noticed. One, like the fight scenes were kind of incredible. Like I burned the edges of the pages as I flipped them too quickly. And so I don't know if that was part of what you wanted to do in those books was to kind of explore how to write a battle scene in an engaging and really compelling way, one. And two, and in Harry Dresden and Codex Alera, you build these worlds and then, to some extent, no spoilers, you destroy them. And what's that like for a writer?
I'm sorry, what was that?
And what's that like for you? Is that free, obviously?
It's like the guy who spends 6 months building a model of Tokyo and then finally gets to strap on the Godzilla suit. That's what it's like. You spend all this time working and getting it perfect, and then you get to look at it and go, and now I'm going to wipe out everything in Dresden's life. I'm going to blow up his office, kadoom, and it's going to burn down his home, smash his car, and it is so much fun to do that.
Yeah. I get that sense that it would be fun to kind of knock over the sandcastle.
It is.
Somebody read.
Oh my God, it's awesome.
I'm attached to it. I enjoy the destroy, but I'm attached to it, and now things are changing, which is kind of
we
the fun
can build
part.
new
Right?
stuff, you know. The great part about being a writer is that it doesn't cost me any more to destroy Chicago than it does to not destroy Chicago. You know, I've got no budget that I have to worry about with that. All I just get words. I've got the ultimate freedom of how I get to present the story or what I want to do, and. Yeah, it is tremendous fun after you spend all this time building things up to go, and now I'm gonna turn everything on its side. It's like, aha! I sometimes feel like one of those painters that paints the giant incomprehensible thing and then goes, aha! And turns it upside down, and it's a portrait of one of the judges in the Who's Got Talent contest, you know. Whose brain works like that? I don't know. That's amazing. But I sometimes get to feel like that, where I get to say, okay, now I've built all your expectations in this one direction. Surprise! You know, that's a ton of fun. Cool. Totally worth the effort it takes to do.
Hi.
Hey.
For those of us that like back to sort of the role-playing thing, as readers, we love to see our characters level up, and but I've seen many authors that level up too much. The campaign goes Monty Hall, and it ceases to become fun almost. And,
yes.
And in your books, thankfully, you don't seem to have an issue with that. Is it hard not to write yourself in a corner that way, though?
No, because I know what the end is. The reason that some of the series go Monty Hall and just go too long, and that people just get too powerful, you know, they get handed the dagger of Cain or whatever, and it just keeps going and going and going, is that the story was supposed to end before that, and they didn't end the story. Stories aren't stories unless they have an ending to them, and I'm one of the people who believes that. I don't believe in a never-ending story, and so for me, it's kind of easy to keep. It's easy to keep Harry in check in terms of where he's getting as he's getting more buff and you know, getting more contacts and so on, because I know what he's going to be fighting and, you know, like in the next book, and what's going to be coming down the line and where he's going to wind up. And because I know all that stuff, I can kind of gauge, okay, he needs to be about this far, now he needs to be about this far, now he needs to be about this far. So that he is never the super overpowered guy who just smashes everything all around him. He still remains the guy who is not the big fish in the pond. He's the medium-sized fish who needs to be smart and fast if he wants to get out, if he wants to stay alive, you know, another day. So it's just all about pacing and knowing where you're going to wind up. I know where I'm going to wind up and what he's going to be doing when we get there. So, you know, it's easy to keep him on track.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
You write action really, really well, and I've
Thank
always
you.
wanted to know: have you studied martial arts, or do you like have any black belts? Have you ever, or how did you do the research for that? Like, how do you know some of those moves and some of the some of what happens in combat? You only know if you've like sparred before. So
I've got about 20 years of martial arts experience. I've studied a bunch of different arts. I don't have black belts in anything because I don't think they're very important.
Right.
But I like to go to new schools, and when I come in, they're like, well, do you have any experience? And I'm like, you know what? Teach me like I don't know anything, because I want to learn what you have to teach me. Usually it doesn't take folks very long to figure out, oh, you've done some of this before. It's like, well, yeah, a little, but I want to learn what you've got. I started off in Shorin-ryu at the local Y. And then I was very fortunate to study Ryukyu Kempo for a long time. I actually got to spend about 3 months in 90-minute one-on-one lessons every day, because I was the only one who ever came to the noon lesson. So I got one-on-one lessons with Mr. Shintaku, who was a 6th Dan in Ryukyu Kempo and was a Japanese collegiate Aikido champion. And was a really good teacher who would hurt you if you did it wrong. So, I mean, you learn very rapidly. When you're in that one-on-one circumstance like that, you learn very rapidly, and you learn a lot very fast. And he was the reason I've got one good martial arts story. That's my own, I mean. After that, it was in college, it was Goju Shoiryu, Aikido, Kung Fu, some Jiu-Jitsu, some Wing Chun. I wasn't very good at Aikido, but it was a beautiful art. I'm too impatient to be good at Aikido. Aikido is one of those arts that's like, basically, it's like, how foolish would you like to look? Come at me that hard. You know, like that. I've done some Kung Fu, some Taekwondo, some Wing Chun, epee, foil, saber. So you know, I know I've got some weapon forms in. but I'm kind of a dilettante. I mean, I can handle myself reasonably well against somebody who is not a professional. A professional would eat me up because professionals are completely different than everybody else. Yeah. But I have learned a lot, and I've got to talk to people a lot, and borrow stories from them, and to just generally, I've had a lot of fun doing it. There's really what I realized at some point. I don't know, maybe 10 years in, I looked around and I realized, wait a minute, the ability to disassemble another human being with your bare hands is not really useful on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't really help you out when you're in the grocery store, you know. But other lessons from martial arts, especially about balance, teach you a whole lot that's very good for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
so.
that's true. Cool.
Nobody, I keep coming up, and all right. So maybe this is an unfair question, but if you weren't a writer, if it didn't take off the way it did, where do you think your life would have gone?
My last real paying job, I was working technical support at a local internet provider. I was the guy who came in at 10 and was responsible for the entire place until 6 a.m. And it was an internet provider that provided, it was the largest provider in Oklahoma, so it provided for everybody at that time. They even had more customers than AOL did in Oklahoma. It was a great job. I had a great boss. It was my Fezziwig job. My boss was former military. He offered to fight a guy for me once. That's how good a boss he was. I had a guy who was on the phone when my boss came in at 6, and he had messed up his computer by around 8 the previous night, and then he tried to fix it until 4 in the morning when he finally called me. You know, at which point there wasn't a whole lot I could do because he had mangled it so badly. And so he was screaming at me on the phone when the boss walks in. And my boss actually offered to fight him. He was ex-military. He was about 6'2", about 245. Played basketball with all the college intern guys. You know, had this buzz cut, blue eyes, looked like the reincarnation of Thor. He was like, "Yeah, no, I'll be happy to talk to you about my employee. You know, you come on down. Yeah, if you're that upset, come on down, and I'll be the one that you'll deal with. You know." And I was like, "Okay, man. When you call me in on a Saturday, I'm coming in after this." But they liked me because I had just enough ability at code that I could kludge something together until morning, so that I didn't have to go get a programmer out of bed at 3. You know, so the programmer would be like, I would wait until 6, and then when I was off my shift, I'd give him a call because that was when I knew when his alarm went off. And he's like, "Is there a problem?" "Yeah, there's a problem. There's a patch program that's kind of running, and it's sort of making things work, but maybe you should get in as quick as you can." He's like, "Okay, thank you for not waking me up." And I loved that job because I liked helping people over the phone. I liked getting them back onto their video games. I liked solving problems. That was fun. Plus, there was a lot of EverQuest going on at that job. Come to think of it, I actually wrote the first 2 books of the Dresden Files and the first Codex Alera book on that job. So there you go. I would probably be doing something in that area still because I love my tech.
Last 2 questions.
Silly Dresden Files question. I remember from Cold Days the shenanigans regarding the origin of the keep. And can we expect more time shenanigans in future books?
More time shenanigans?
Yes.
Sir, one of the laws of magic states that you cannot mess with time like that. Of course there will be more time shenanigans. I only established the 7 laws of magic so that I could have Dresden methodically break them one by one.
All right, speaking of silly questions, after the way you dealt with Cat Sith in the Dresden books and having a whole race of talking cats in these ones, I'm kind of scared. Should I be?
It's not so bad. They're kind of like, they're like fuzzy, really egotistical little libertarians, that are just, they're rolling all over everywhere. They're completely independent. They don't want to pitch into on anybody's help. They're arrogant. They're egotistical. They're closed-minded. They're adorable. They get away with it, and they're almost as good as they think they are, which makes them very useful to the team. But yeah, they're. At the same time, the cats in these stories, they have created weapons for themselves. It's they wear fighting spurs that they strap onto their rear legs, and they are not to be taken lightly. They're not quite Cat Sith, but they're close.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
Aeronaut's Windlass is out now.